Tomorrow's Brain. This is a One School for All lecture by me, Andrew Thomas, for my wonderful international students to watch by the 5th of November 2025 when we next meet. So, whatever else we do, and we do a great deal of other things, but whatever else we do, we as teachers are in the business of changing brains. I mean, probably calf muscles and relationships and a lot of other things as well. But we should probably know a little bit about brains. And children start their lives with very few connections. We can tell from various scanning techniques. But by the time they start their school career, their brains are already dizzyingly complex. And throughout childhood, they are trying to reduce that complexity a little bit. And if you look at the diagrams of the neuronal trees at various stages in a child's life, it's an interesting set of diagrams. And this tells us a great deal of things, but if nothing else, it tells us that brains change, and you can, as a teacher, influence that change. So you need to make some decisions about what kind of things you want to do in terms of what kind of changes you are making to the brains of children. You're not a brain surgeon, but you do change brains, whether you like it or not. These days, in the scientific community, everyone is talking about brain plasticity because it's one of the keys to understanding diversity. We used to explain diversity, which is to say how we are all different as humans. We are the same species, but we're all very different. We used to explain that fact by genes, but it turns out that the genome is much less complex than we had expected, and people who have similar genes end up with very, very different lives and bodies and brains. And how do we explain that? And one of the explanations is that our brains change themselves.
So most of you have heard about taxi drivers and their amazing brains. Taxi drivers need to know streets much better than you and I. I get lost just going from home sometimes if I stop thinking too much about Wittgenstein or work or Game of Thrones. Whereas taxi drivers know every street wherever they're working, and they know it extremely well. They can tell you automatically and really quickly what's the fastest way to get somewhere, and how long it takes to get there, which means they're better than us, and specifically it means their brains are better than ours, particularly at going through streets. And that's not just an exaggeration. People have actually examined the brains of taxi drivers, and it turns out their brains are actually bigger than ours as well, specifically the bit where they store maps. And the map bit of the brain has been changed, and it's not because they're born like that. It's not because of some genetic advantage they have. They have changed their brains, and that's what we do when we learn. We change our physical brains.
Wonderful, thank you, Andrew. So, taxi drivers change their brains, and we are the makers of our brains. We all know some ways in which we give our brain an extreme makeover. Taxi drivers study, but we could also take drugs in the case of addictive drugs. We choose unfreedom. We choose to take the drug and then can make fewer choices in the future. Or we can experience direct trauma to the brain. Or we get old and experience sickness, or we can willingly or unwillingly engage in various kinds of therapy. Even the number of calories we take in the course of one day has a massive effect on our brain. So our thoughts are changed by our calories and our therapy and our drugs, and therefore our behavior and who we are. It's not really a question of whether to change your brain or not, but how, which changes to make. Change itself is given. Donald Hebb famously said that neurons that fire together wire together. It's actually much more complex and more intelligent than that. But this Hebbian transformation is a simple way of describing it, which is to say what we do a lot, we continue to be able to do a lot. when we're really good, for example, at playing games or using particular mobile platforms, our brains change as a result, and they become really good at using those mobile platforms or games. As you can see here, I'm amazing at Tetris. So a further question is, have I consciously learnt to be good at Tetris? Or learnt to manipulate the world or to use a particular platform? Or has my brain been domesticated by that game? I don't remember ever having burnt with a desire to use Apple platforms, Apple mobiles, but now Apple has recruited me and molded the neurons of my brain into the shape of an Apple user. And what an Apple user can and cannot do, that's a question for Apple themselves. Catherine Malibu says that yes, our brains are plastic, but there's a massive difference between how they are plastic. Are we a hammer or a nail? We can change our brains to a community framework like Apple, and that's what she calls flexibility. But we could also change our brains to think differently. We could resist the ways in which we are governed or shaped by Apple or political changes. And we could change the programming or change the coding, if you like, of our brain. And Malibu calls this explosivity. Not plastic flexibility, but plastic explosives. And this becomes a choice for us all. What we see and do and practice becomes our politics and determines our future. So Malibu observes that whenever people talk about plasticity, they tend to talk about flexibility in the research discourse. Adapting ourselves to particular situations is what humans are good at. And with the arrival of big data, the population of our brains are being, or all the brains, the population of brains are being analyzed and studied for marketing purposes all the time. When Facebook changes its layout, for example, 3 billion brains across the world adapt to those changes. And that's the level we're working at. When a government changes its national curriculum, it adjusts the brains of its flock. And for Malibu, the question is not whether to change or not, but how, what kind of change, and specifically whether it's flexibility or explosivity. And we need to make that choice as well. Do we really want pupils who are just going to adapt to anything, whatever the teacher or the government decides? You get to decide what devices you are used to using. As a person, as a human being, that's your choice. But as a teacher, you make decisions about the brains of your pupils and change their lives and their future. Not all of their choices, they've still got freedom, but you make some influence on those choices. You can't even decide not to change them because brains are changing all the time and you have an influence whether you like it or not. Your choices have massive neurological and thereby political and historical consequences. Becoming a teacher puts the neurological ball in your court. Let's see how you play it.